Welcome to the Authenticos podcast, the show that covers everything related to delivering digital transformation in large organizations. Your hosts, Jacob and Jesper, will share their own stories and unfiltered views as they guide you through delivery of digital transformation.
All right, Jacob.
Here we go again.
Yes, another episode of Authenticos. So this time we're talking about cultural differences, both on projects, regions, in people.
Yes.
You know,
It's a subject close to my heart because all the way back into my childhood, I always have been fascinated by, by people, cultural differences, traveling.
Yeah.
And during my high school and business school, I signed up for various cultural differences courses, just to deep dive into
and
the history of people, but also the how we are as we are, and that I have been able to.
and understand the differences between people as well, I guess.
Yes.
That's,
That's one side of the coin, but also my career has shown me, because during being part of all these projects, I have also made a lot of mistakes in terms of cultural understanding of the cultures
as in really misunderstanding, the culture of where you are and the people in front of you.
Yes, and just misreading, not reading people
I see.
the way it should be.
Okay.
I was expecting.
But it's also just an inherent part of what we do, that we get exposed to this. When you start working on transformation, and therefore people at a kind of global scale. There's obviously, I've definitely seen a lot of cultural, just specifics to certain cultures that I wouldn't have expected, and that kind of blindsided me, and I guess therefore also I would have mismanaged it or approached it wrongly to begin with.
Right.
And I know you just wrote an article on
about
this.
Yeah, because I try to come out with this message whenever I can about respect for cultural differences.
Yeah.
So
what does that mean?
Well,
cultural differences.
It means that obviously we're different from region to region, and you can do a lot of study into going back and and there's a famous Dutch guy called Geert Hofstede who did a survey of IBM back in I think it was in 1970s, early 1980s.
Yeah.
Where he studied the IBM culture across different countries, regions, and then he built this mythology around it. And one of the things he's looking at is actually the power distance between how organizations or how countries operate in terms of flat structures within the organizations.
Yeah. Whether or not, I guess it's very management driven, or whether or not people are empowered.
Exactly. How many levels do you have to go through to actually get a decision through the organization? And I just found that that's one of the aspects he's looking at. He's looking at different aspects as well, masculinity versus femininity. He's looking at uncertainty, avoidance. So he's looking at a couple of really interesting things. And of course, it doesn't cover everything, but it's a really good starting point for understanding when you go into, let's say, an ERP implementation. You're going to roll it out into different regions. Which countries are you going to face? How are these countries? How do they score on his this chart.
Yeah, it's like a cultural fit chart, or
yeah.
I see.
So I used it. I have used it, and I have also the teams I've been a part of. Let's say we were implementing in Asia.
Yeah.
Very different organizational setup culture than in Europe or the US.
And I guess kind of I kind of wanted to highlight some of the differences that you see between those regions, but I guess it's also important to say that, you know, this is it's kind of we're stereotyping to make it easier, because obviously there are.
Yeah, but one example is, let's say Asia. And again, Asia is a massive region, but there's a tendency towards, you know, collective culture, you know, versus individual culture.
And
meaning
collective.
Meaning that if you're in a business environment and you have to make decisions, you know, you often have to bring a certain amount of people around the table. And I experienced that doing an implementation in Japan when I was very, very young. I was sent to Japan to implement this finance system, ERP system. Was there for 8 weeks in Tokyo. And every time I had to sit down with, let's say, AP responsible, we had to bring the whole finance department into the meeting. And in the beginning, I didn't quite understand that.
Is that like a respect thing?
It was kind of a respect, and that everyone had to get involved, even though they were not expected to, you know, to participate in the meeting. They still had to be part of the meeting.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I just, you know, coming from the Nordic country where we would just, you know, bring in the absolute needed people, that was like a wake-up call for me. So that was, you know, me face to face in a culture, very young, in where everything was different, and that's why I rather quickly, you know, started to adjust my whole communication style. I started to adjust, you know, the change management style.
And I guess it's in particular it's the communication that's impacted by the cultural differences.
Absolutely,
you know.
Absolutely.
I know, like a very low-level example is when I started kind of working internationally. So I moved as a consultant from Denmark to UK. So this is just within the European borders, so to say, the continent. I was used to kind of the way of working and communicating as it is in Scandinavia, where it's very just direct to the point. Can you do this? Thank you. And that's it. Then people, you know, logically they're like, yes, that makes sense, or they say no, because that doesn't make sense. First job in London, UK, that was just my way of communicating. Please do this, do that. Whereas I quickly found out that could be interpreted as very abrasive or aggressive.
Yeah.
Whereas there was no intention of that. It was just like being short and precise. So my communication style had to change there, you know, and that's, you know, that's just flying 1.5 hours away, and the cultural communication is different, because what I found there is effective communication in the UK, or at least in the organizations I was in, that it was, can you please do this because of, and therefore there is this benefit, and yada 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 yada.
Yeah.
So my let's say mail that would normally be 1 paragraph long would become 3, 4, 5 paragraphs long, and actually to some extent inhibiting my effectiveness. But I guess in a way the communication was more clear, but very different. You know, and I guess that's what.
Yeah, and another example, very simple, you know, but very also powerful is let's say you're implementing in a country. Don't just take the, let's say, training material and you know, accept that's going to work globally, you need to adjust it. You need to adjust it to the
our audience.
Yeah, to the audience, to the culture. You need to, and that goes also back to your whole change management strategy. You cannot just have a global change management strategy. You have to to adapt that change management strategy into the regions that you operate in, whether you're doing implementation in the US, in Europe, or let's say Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things really that's why this topic is super relevant, because you can really make things difficult for you if you don't understand this.
Yeah.
And you expect everyone else in the room to be the same as you are.
Yeah.
So I always take the approach of being the underdog and just adapt to, like you said, in the UK. I lived in the UK too, and obviously the way of doing projects is different than other places.
But I think that's a good point. Like kind of just go in, assess the water before you enforce your communication style or management style to that particular place.
Yes. And then we come back to something which is close to my mind, the project phase 0, which I talk a lot about, the whole preparation phase. You can actually do a lot of this in your pre-project phase. Again, let's say you're a manufacturing company, you're going to implement in 10 different regions.
Yeah.
Do your assessment, early in the pre-project phase. Which countries are you actually going to implement in? Prepare your team, prepare your communication style as early as possible.
And I guess then thinking those cultural differences as part of the, who to involve and how to communicate with them.
Yes.
Because I know certain regions, they would feel that you're over communicating if you're including everyone every time. But it sounds like if you went to Asia or Japan in particular, that would be the way to do it.
Yeah, I had a customer the other day. They were on track for starting up a global ERP rollout, and they asked me, "Oh, Jacob, should we include our global stakeholders? How early should we?" And that was a really good question.
Yeah.
And my feedback back to the client was actually to include them as early as possible.
Yeah.
To avoid potential pushback.
Yeah. But there's obviously a level there to include them in.
Yeah. Again, you don't want to, based on your communication and your stakeholders. But I have been part of projects where we started that whole communication way too late.
Yeah.
And then we ended up having a major pushback from countries, because they came back and said, okay, we cannot see ourselves into this template or into this solution.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny one, because like even in so I had a case in Spain where we were doing a global rollout, and the Spanish part of the transformation and implementation was kind of starting to halt behind the roadmap, and it wasn't really performing as well as it should. So I went down there kind of just to oversee it, and initially, so this was around winter time, and just going into winter. And went there, and then I would go into the office, but 8 o'clock in the morning, everyone would be there. The whole office would be there. And then, I would leave at 6, 7 in the evening, and everyone would be there. And this continued for like a week. And then I pulled the director to the side and said, what's happening here? Like, why is everyone here so early and then not leaving until very late? And she said, Jesper, it's very simple. In the winter, we work long hours, so that when we get to the summer, we can work small hours. And that was the Spanish culture, or at least the regional culture there in Spain.
Yeah.
And because we hadn't considered that, that obviously meant that whatever activities we had planned throughout the kind of the summer period and then just the months just before and after, obviously they would halt if people are basically only working half time.
Yeah.
It's a massive cultural difference that then impacted our project.
Yeah.
Whereas if we had considered that, we would just have changed our roadmap.
Yeah.
To obviously take into account how they work there locally.
That's a very good example. I have a slightly different one. We were implementing for a manufacturing company in southern Germany.
Yeah.
And in Bavaria, so we were approaching, the Oktoberfest, the Wiesn in German. And we were very, very, we had to meet this deadline. We had to be live. We knew that the Oktoberfest was coming up. We had to do, transfer our inventory. And for some reason, we thought, we're going to keep our go live, which we have communicated.
Yeah.
And of total disrespect for the region, we tried to force people into the office, and it just blew up.
Yeah.
So we had to move go live because we, as an implementation team, me included, we didn't have respect for the local.
It's like putting a go live on Christmas Day, I guess.
Yes.
Of course you don't do that.
Yes. So it's just an example of.
At least not in Europe, but yeah.
It's just an example of pay attention to the local traditions, and don't try to force the people to come in and do inventory during an important cultural event.
Yeah. It's
and that's back to what I'm saying, that I have made, throughout my career, I have made many of these assumptions where I became quickly, I learned from them, and of course I won't do that again. But it's just that's why, coming back to why this topic is so interesting, because there's so many layers to this.
It is, like another example. This was another kind of global rollout I was doing as well, where the headquarter of this company, so it's a marketing company, digital marketing and media agency, had a headquarter in actually Japan and in the UK, but the project was run out of the UK UK headquarters. And in the UK, they, at least on the consultancy side, and it's very, very normal that you go down, you grab your sandwich for lunch, bag of crisps or whatever, and you go back to your desk and you sit there and work, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And the social interaction over lunch might be the walk down to get the food and back again.
Yeah.
That's just normal, and then people might sit by their laptop or computer and they'll Google something for 15 minutes and then on with the workday. So our project or program came to Italy, and obviously lunchtime in Italy is sacred.
Yeah.
And it's not a 15-minute ordeal. So
it's a full lunch with can include three courses.
And the headquarters were getting a little bit frustrated with Italy because they wouldn't turn up to meetings. So a little bit like the Spanish one. I went down there for a period. Actually ended up living in Italy, and in the end, I had to tell headquarters, these 2 hours during the day, don't put in any meetings, because you're not going to change the culture here, which is they go for lunch together and they socialize, and they can't tell you if they're back in 1 hour or 2 hours. But they will put in, their working hours over the day. So just don't put anything in there because they won't turn up. So that's just a lunch difference in culture.
Yeah.
Which impacted the way, things were being, or the collaboration across regions. So yeah, that was just another little funny one.
I had the same experience in Asia, where the core team was sent, but it was also a manufacturing company we were implementing. We had to send the core team like 2 weeks ahead to interact with the local team, because building relationship with the locals was very important. You could not just bring people together and say, okay, this is the work we have to do, this is the project we have to do. No, people had to know each other first. So investing into the relationships, going out socially, drinking, was a big part of that. So,
which is another thing as well with international teams, especially when it's people from different countries being brought to one place. Drinking can actually be a big thing. I think it can be a big socializer and bringing people together, but also it can be a big divider in the team, because you got people that, either from religious or just personal beliefs, they just don't drink.
Yes.
And that could be very uncomfortable then for them to socialize with people who do.
Yeah. But then we're back to the respect for the cultural differences.
Exactly. It's just being mindful about who's there.
Yeah.
Also, especially when you then try to organize something for the team.
Yeah.
Don't go to a steakhouse if half of your team are vegetarian or vegans. You're not gonna.
It just brings up my funny story too.
Yeah.
We were doing pre-implementation in the US. We went Texas.
Yeah.
Texas, US. A lot of meat.
Yes.
Of course, most days we went to steak restaurants. At that time, I remember we had a couple of girls on the implementation. Vegetarian, they didn't eat meat, so
Yeah.
But at that time, we just tried to. Or remember, the project team tried to force everyone to, one size fits all, to go to the same. And it was just looking back, it was a different time period.
Yeah.
There was no respect for people who didn't drink, people who didn't, eating meat. And we just live in a different time now, where with these aspects are super important.
Yeah.
And that brings me over to another point: diversity. Cultural differences. Try to build your teams, embrace diversity into your teams. It just gives much more fun experience.
It does. But you do have to be a bit more smart about it, because then you can't assume. But yeah, diversity for me is absolutely the way forward as well.
Yeah, especially when you work hard on an implementation, but you also have fun at the same time. You can go out with the colleagues after.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not so much cultural differences, or maybe it is. So one of the things that I find in creating a good performing project team is actually that either you make sure that everyone's local, or you make sure that no one is local. And the reason for that is if let's say you bring in a project team to a location where no one is local, they use each other socially in the outside of work too. And they form bonds, and that obviously spills over to work.
Right.
Whereas what I found is if you have half a team that's local and half a team that's not, the people who's local, well, they go home to their husbands, wives, kids, or other social things that they plan. So they don't really form the connections with the non-local team. But if everyone's local, then they have that in common, and then they can bond over that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So I've always found that the best performing teams, they're either or. It's never mixed.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's a good interesting perspective.
Yeah. So I don't know if that would count as a cultural difference, but it's definitely to do with where you're sourcing them from and the impact of that.
Yeah, I would say it's a sourcing. It's something you have to think about when you source and set up your team. One thing that comes to my mind is when you're doing an implementation, always embrace locals who know compliance, know the local legal of that country that you go into.
Absolutely.
I have seen major setbacks in projects where those elements were again included a bit too late. Let's say that.
But that should be part of the Project Zero or discovery phase, right? When you kind of warm up and kind of assess the landscape.
Yeah. And that's why Project Phase Zero, dependent on the project, can include different things.
Yeah.
It's different element you put into a Project Phase Zero if you are a manufacturing company.
Yeah.
Heading into a global implementation versus you.
And I guess you can have multiple points as well, where you essentially have a Project Phase Zero. If the program would have one, and then the sub projects themselves can have a kind of a Project Zero.
Yes.
Which would all then need the cultural element and understanding, which you refine for that market.
Yes.
So I think
that was the culture.
Brief little touch on cultural differences.
Yeah, respect for cultural differences, embrace diversity, do your homework.
Exactly. And I guess just be flexible, really. Have the mindset that there will be differences that you also can't anticipate, which will impact what you're doing, and you just somehow need to be flexible enough to incorporate that into your plan, the way you approach delivery and just management.
And as you said, don't book people into doing lunch. I think that's a very that's a very touching.
I do have my issues with the Spanish example where they work half hours in the summer, but that's just how it works there.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
good talk.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the stories.
Thank you.
All right.